I puzzle the doctors because I seem completely well, but for my insistence that the glass city is real. They diagnose me with this and that, implement various treatments and regimens, none of which come close to shattering my delusion. I am not allowed visitors, perhaps because I might tell them about the glass city, and because my account would be so convincing that everybody will believe it and end up here too. My days in the padded room are over at least. They don't consider me a threat, either to them or to myself. I am perfectly lucid, and if I would only tell them that I made it all up, that there is no glass city, no stranger, no slow slide into glassy oblivion, then I might be able to return home and live a perfectly reasonable life. The clinic nestles against a lake. Sometimes when the sunlight ripples across the water, its reflection resembles skyscrapers, futuristic monoliths and highways. It glistens harsh and appalling, and I have to avert my eyes. The other patients love these sunny days. The nurses take them out and arrange them like scarecrows, slumped and nearly lifeless along the waterfront. Sometimes someone brings out a radio and they listen to the odd waltz. It's not unknown for a band to set up on our manicured lawns and for a conductor to raise his baton into the sun. The calming effect of the lake and the music soothes even the most agitated patients, but not me. I cannot look at the lake. Those duplicitous reflections remind me of the glass city and everything that was. I met him on one such sunny day, long ago, the stranger who approached across the meadows with his face hidden. I stared for too long, you see. Anyone might catch a glimpse of the glass city. It appears on the very precipice of the horizon, a mass of glass skyscrapers that glitter and glint in the sun. The city appears futuristic yet familiar, as though it belongs to a life yet to be lived. In short, the sight is hypnotic, but you must not stare. If you see it, run. Run home before he approaches. Fool that I am, I stood there and watched. He raised a gloved hand, waved, shouted a cheerful greeting and then stood by my side. The two of us gazed wordlessly at the glass city for some time. If time passed at all, the afternoon never seemed to mature, the sun made no progress across the sky, until at last, he spoke. It's beautiful, isn't it? His voice was hollow but warm. The glass city only appears very rarely. You are privileged to see it. Have you seen it before? My friend the stranger laughed a peculiar-sounding laugh. I am from there. Do you see that sky grazer? That really big one just there? I live in it. I was watching you. The glass city found you, so I thought I had better come out and say hello. After this remark, he didn't say anything else for a long time. That is the danger. There appears to be no pressure. No threats. He will not try to force you to go. We can go there, you know. He spoke at last. I can take you. It chose you, why else would it appear? My life was difficult at the time, far harder than it is even now. My mother had died recently, and as a result of my grief, I lost my job and was unable to find another one. I was alone, utterly alone, in a one-bedroom apartment rattled by the wind and with mold climbing up the walls. The stranger promised me that all would be well in the glass city. There were jobs aplenty. I would stay in a beautiful apartment in one of the glass sky grazers, overlooking the city and its mesmeric highways. They could not take my sorrow away, but the people were so kind, so happy and so welcoming, that my heart would be flooded with joy. And there it was, shimmering on the precipice of the horizon. Only a fool would say no to such an offer. You can stay for as long as you want, he concluded. He even handed me a small wad of cash, the notes and coins bearing unfamiliar images and an unfamiliar language, and I promised to pay him back as soon as I was able. Now follow me. It's not far. You see? It's just there, so near. With that, he led me across the meadows until we arrived in the glass city. Skyscrapers, glistening in the sunshine, reared up on every side. Glass cars. Glass shops. A world made entirely of glass. True to his word, the stranger conveyed me to a vast skyscraper, directed me to a concierge at a glass desk and then bid me farewell, promising to return in a few days and check that all was as it should be. But I know that you will be happy here, he said as he left. Welcome home, smiled the concierge, although his voice lacked the enthusiasm of my guide and his eyes were downcast, never meeting my gaze. He handed me a keycard and we made our way to the elevator. Constructed from glass, as it ascended I was afforded a vertiginous view of the glass city threaded between the skyscrapers, climbing like pillars to the high heavens. Glass unfolded as far as the eye could see, the city transparent but stretching on forever and with no end in sight, already vaster than it had appeared on the horizon. Sunlight blazed as though on the periphery of a dream, threatening to scorch it all into non-existence at any moment.
Who built this place?
I asked incredulously, but the concierge only shrugged and said that he thought it had always been there.
But that's not possible. This place is modern. It must be new, and yet I could not deny that there was something old about the glass city. It had a sensation of age. Perhaps more than age. Of timelessness. The elevator pinged and we reached my apartment.
The concierge unlocked the door and gave me a quick tour. It was a modern if somewhat sparse home, but far superior to anywhere I had ever lived before.
Only one thing struck me as odd.
No curtains? I asked, but the concierge didn't answer.
When he departed, I attempted to make a phone call, but when I picked up the phone, all I heard was a deadline.
Next, I tried the radio, which emitted only static, and then the television, which displayed a blank screen on every channel. Pouring myself a glass of water, I gazed out of my window, across the abyss toward an adjacent glass skygrazer where another figure, not unlike myself in size and proportion, stared back.
We remained in this position for some time until I raised my hand and waved. The figure turned away and left the window. Evening was already settling in.
I found some food in one of the cupboards, no doubt left by my companion from the field, prepared a hasty dinner and then settled down to sleep. I could scarcely believe my good fortune. For the first time in so long I was content, happy, even optimistic about the future. All the weight of the past seemed to slip away, and with it so did I, falling into a deep and dreamless sleep. Something roused me in the early hours. Darkness pressed against the windows, but moonlight too, and my glass room glowed pallidly. For a few moments I wasn't sure exactly what had woken me, but then I heard it, a sound so faint that it might have been a breath of wind or a whisper. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but the sound grew louder, as though it wanted my attention. Finally, I climbed out of bed and searched for the source of the disturbance. I followed the sound out of my apartment and into the corridor, where it was no louder but did seem to change direction. The whispers eddied briefly and then congregated around the elevator. As though in a trance, I followed them, pressed the button and was conveyed to the ground floor lobby. The concierge had gone and the front desk lay empty. The moonlight was stronger down here, but I realized that it wasn't just the moon, there was another light spilling in and illuminating everything in pale green.
Someone had left the doors flung wide open, ushering the whispers in from outside. I stood still and listened, trying to count the number of voices. Hundreds, maybe more.
A vast congregation was whispering directly to me, encouraging me to go outside into the sickly-hued light.
What I saw outside will remain with me forever. I will never forget it, and nor will I pretend that it didn't happen just to appease my doctors.
A gigantic eye, vaguely human but with a deranged aspect, loomed above the city and the skyscrapers.
It was the source of the light and, as far as I could tell, the source of the whispers.
The inhabitants of the glass city, as pale and transparent as ghosts and as still as statues, stood in the middle of the road and along the sidewalk, staring fixedly at the disembodied eye. As soon as I stepped outside, the eye swiveled, turning its attention to me.
I felt its gaze like a physical weight, hauling me towards it.
No matter how hard I tried to look away, the effect was ensnaring, and then there was another eye, and then another, until the night sky was nothing but eyes.
Silence lay heavy and thick as though the whole world was holding its breath. I couldn't look away.
The eyes held my gaze until slowly, I forced my feet to move, tried to back away, and then a new sound reached me.
Spinning around, I saw a side alley away from the main road and a figure slumped on the ground. "Help!"
The figure's voice reached me through the murk and I ran towards him, crouched by his side.
"Please," he said again, his voice faltering, "don't let them see me." Of course, there was nothing I could do. I couldn't shield him. We were surrounded by glass buildings and the eyes had an unobstructed view.
Some of them even swiveled around to watch, but still, the stricken figure pleaded, begging for me to protect him. "The eyes," I whispered, "what are they?"
"They steal," muttered the cowering stranger, "your thoughts, your mind, until they have everything and you have nothing, and then." The glass crept over him.
First, his hands turned to glass and he held them in front of his face, eyes wide with terror, and then it spread. It crept along his arms, his body stiffened and then his face was glass, his mouth, finally his eyes.
In a desperate attempt to resist, he staggered to his feet, but found his legs unwilling.
He tottered, stumbled and then crashed to the ground, his brittle glass body shattering with a high shriek. Recoiling, I dashed back into the road but found myself in the full glare of the eyes.
They stared down and I felt myself flow into them.
My thoughts, my mind, my memories, all that I was, flowed upwards on an irresistible current. Staggering and losing all sense of direction, I stumbled down the road, grabbing the figures, trying anything that I could to hide from the eyes. The whispers grew more intense, filling my mind until I couldn't think, until my thoughts were gone, and wherever I looked, wherever I tried to run, eyes upon eyes upon eyes upon eyes, watching and stealing and watching and stealing, and I must have found my way back to my apartment building, even tottered into the glass elevator.
The eyes watched me all the way up.
Watched me as I stumbled along the corridor, watched me as I threw open the door to my apartment, looked for anywhere safe, anywhere that they couldn't see me, find me, steal from me, but amongst the glass walls, the glass ceiling, the glass floor, there was nowhere. A peculiar light emitted from my sitting room and I, feverish and nearly delirious, stumbled towards it. The television had been turned on, but it wasn't displaying blank screens anymore. A giant eye, identical to the ones in the sky, peered unblinkingly at me. The same sensation of appalling vertigo, of peering into an impossibly deep cavern, swept over me and I felt my mind emptying into the eye. Scrambling for the remote, I changed the channel, but the eye remained. Finally, I reached for the plug, but even pulling that didn't remove the eye, which continued to stare and drain.
Slamming the door, I made for my bedroom, but when I looked into the mirror, the eyes were there. They were waiting in the bathroom mirror too.
The gaps between my thoughts grew wider and wider as those eyes plundered everything, every shred of consciousness, every memory, my very being.
I began to hear voices speaking inside my head, voices that were not mine and were not singular.
I realized that these were the voices of the multitude, the eyes, the beings, who control the glass city, speaking through me as I slowly became them. Looking down at my arms, I screamed because they were suddenly made from glass. My legs, I reached up to touch my face, found only glass, and then, in a final moment of terror, I saw myself as if viewed from above.
I was a tiny glass figure in my apartment, and then I stumbled, fell, shattered into a million pieces.
Only to awake the next morning drenched in a cold sweat, having apparently passed out on my sofa. Sunlight streamed through the window, glinting off the surrounding sky grazers. The sky was perfectly clear, with neither clouds nor eyes to be seen.
Far below me, traffic traced a slow passage along the highways, and people no larger than ants milled this way and that. Life in the city appeared to be normal, as though the horrors of the night before had never taken place.
I flicked through the television channels and found only static. The mirrors reflected my face, tired and haggard but distinctively mine. Downstairs, I found the lobby empty but for the same concierge at the desk in his waistcoat. Despite everything, when I arrived at the desk, all I could think to do was make the banalest complaint that came to mind.
"My television," I said quietly, surprised at how hollow and unlike me my voice sounded. "It doesn't work."
"Oh," replied the concierge, "I will send somebody to fix it."
I stared back at him, trying to think of a reasonable way to raise everything that I had experienced in the night, but the words wouldn't come. And what if I did complain? What if I ranted and raved? What good would it do?
I bid him farewell and made my way outside. I was almost willing to pass off the experience of the previous night as a dream or even a hallucination, but I had not walked far when my left hand began to burn as though it had been exposed to the sun for hours.
When I raised it to my face, I noticed that it was heavy, cumbersome and lacked sensation. It had transformed into glass.
Holding it aloft, I could see the distorted reflections of the skyscrapers, even the outline of the sun blazing like a deranged old eye. Panic reared inside and I stowed the hand away in my pocket, determined not to look at it again.
I knew that I must escape. It would only be a matter of time until the other hand, then my arms, my body, my eyes, I would turn into glass.
Strangers passed and I scrutinized them, gazed into their listless faces and saw only glass. "Hello?" I ran up to them and shouted, but they passed me by without reacting. "Can you hear me? Where am I?
What is this place?"
A fog of panic blurred my vision and I began to run, shoving the glass strangers out of my way and hurtling through the streets as fast as I could sprint. The sun rose higher, but I ran and ran until I had no energy left and was forced to slow down.
Even then, I didn't stop. The city unfolded, but I walked. I kept walking.
I felt as though I would never stop, as though if I did stop I would turn into glass and be left to plod out my dull and thoughtless life in the city. The further I walked, the more the glass city seemed to grow.
Even the faces of its inhabitants began to duplicate.
I tried buses, even found a metro buried beneath the city streets, but no matter how long I sat, no matter how many tickets I bought, the city stretched on and on with no sign of the outside world. Glass inhabitants plodded out their daily routines like automatons, and in the end, I exhausted the money handed to me by the stranger. Despite traveling for what seemed like hours and being utterly lost, I found that my apartment complex was only a street away and a few minutes' walk.
It reared obnoxious and triumphant in its victory over me, the upper floors seething white-hot under the sun. I strode up to the front desk and without any preamble said, "I want to get out of here." "Where would you like to go?" "Out of this city altogether." I came in, I was. But the memory of where exactly I'd come from was beginning to fade. "Just get them to take me to the city limits. The edge. I'll find my own way from there." His hand lingered over the phone, and for a moment, just a moment, the delusion threatened to shatter. Perhaps it was all a bizarre fantasy and he would simply make a phone call, and then I would be gone, free to resume my old life. His hand hesitated. It hung over the telephone and then pulled away.
"Well?"
I demanded. "What are you waiting for?" "There are no taxis today."
"What do you mean there aren't any taxis?" He stared me full in the face, the first time that anybody had ever looked at me properly in the glass city.
His glass eyes met mine, and for a moment there was something human behind them, something resembling sympathy.
"There's no way out," said my glassy concierge quietly. "Believe me, everybody has tried, but the city goes on and on. Once you're here, there's no way back." In a fit of despair, I reached across the counter, grabbed him by the collar and shook him violently, making all kinds of demands and threats. I told him that I had to go back, would not remain here, would go outside and run until I dropped down dead if I must.
I ranted and raved, shook him and roared into his face.
Were those tears attempting to form in his glass eyes?
Or was that only a trick of the light too?
The whole thing just an exercise in illusion and duplicity? "There might be a way, but nobody dares to try it," he said at last, his entire glass frame shaking with grief. "Tell me," I bellowed, because anything, no matter how risky, was better than another night like the last.
I released him and he slumped back into his chair.
I watched him carefully, trying to determine whether those were real tears, whether he was even capable of crying. Straightening his uniform, he beckoned me into a back room, closed the door and then listened for a few moments.
When nobody came, and the entire apartment appeared to be lying in silence, he told me about the only possible escape route from the glass city.
"Someone knocks at my hospital room door."
Visitors are unheard of in the afternoon. The doctors come in the morning and evening. They hand out their drugs, ensure that I take them, and then they shuffle off again.
"Who is it?"
I call. The door opens and it's one of the doctors in a long white coat. "Good afternoon," he says. "I hope you are feeling well. What do you want?"
"We are moving you to a different hospital," replies the doctor flatly and without meeting my eye.
"A different hospital? After all this time?"
"Why?"
"We believe that your treatment is complete. There's nothing more to be done with you here. The process is at an end."
He touches my arm and I recoil, not at him, but at the peculiar, hollow sound of my own flesh. The doctor leans over me and the sunlight strikes him at a peculiar angle, a glass face, a glass hand. "Aha," I smile. The sensation is one of relief because it was true, every moment of it.
"I never really left."